So when do you think they're going to get rid of the physical dollars? When do you think they're going to make that move?
Oh, I think they would have done it by now if they thought they could get away with it.
All right.
And they are trying for all their worth in Europe to do so. And fortunately, people in Europe have woken up and, are drawing back from that. And in this country, I think they quickly and correctly concluded that they would not be able to introduce a central bank digital currency. So what they've done, and I've watched this and tracked it uh, for at least a decade now, I'd say, in various blogs on my website. What they did was something very clever, and I, you know, I'm very upfront about this. They had me hoodwinked at the beginning of this because what they're doing now is they're opening up these state bullion depositories. Texas was the first to open a state bullion depository. Come in, deposit your silver or your gold or your palladium or whatever it is in our state bullion depository, and you can have this certificate of deposit and go spend it. So at the beginning of this, I thought, well, this is interesting because what they're doing is they're trying to restore stability to the money supply. Good idea. And Utah followed up very quickly after that. Utah became the second state to do this. And now we have several states all over the country passing laws where they're removing sales tax on gold and silver. So, in other words, you can use them. They're trying to remonetize gold and silver, but there's a catch. And I just wrote about this catch in the two books that just came out, the Rialto Enrichment and the Rialto Enrichment Reconstructed, about the war between the states and the financial policy that the country initiated after the end of the war between the states. And the problem was, and I'm going to go around Harvey's barn here, and I hope people will bear with me because this is a complicated thing to explain. But I want people to see that the country has been here before and has been put into these financial traps before, so don't fall for it this time, okay?
Yeah.
After the Civil War, what we have to remember is prior to the Civil War, the entire debt of the whole country, the budget for the whole government was $80 million. What happened as a result of the Civil War is that in the Union alone, just the Union, that debt had ballooned 1,600% to $1.3 billion in just 4 years. That's not counting the Confederacy's debt, which was a similarly sized debt of about $990 million. So, total it all together, the two sides in the Civil War racked up about $3 billion worth of debt, which is, several magnitudes of order above what we entered the Civil War with. So, as a result of this, look what happened. You had three different kinds of money circulating in the Union, all right? Just the Union. You had gold and silver specie, which quickly fled circulation because the government, the Union government, needed that gold and silver specie to conduct international trade.
Right.
So what remained in circulation within the Union was either monetized debt, in other words, money that had been printed and issued into circulation against federal government sovereign bonds, much like now, and then also the Lincoln Greenback, which was simply money that was printed, decreed by Congress to be legal tender, and printed and circulated without any debt interest whatsoever. And of course, that ruined the union's ability to get credit in the European financial markets because, they weren't having that system. It ballooned the money supply. And at the end of the war, then, this means that you've got very little specie in circulation. You've got some money in circulation that's monetized debt, like what we have now with our Federal Reserve notes. And then you had the Lincoln Greenback, which was a considerable part of the circulating money, which wasn't backed by anything. So the Union, in several currency acts after the end of the Civil War, decided, well, if we're going to conduct international trade, we have to get the dollar back onto some sort of relationship with gold. And prior, please note what I just said with gold,
Yeah.
because they demonetized silver. Okay. In other words, their policy was to deflate the currency. And we know that that was a deliberate policy because the Comstock silver lode over in your neck of the woods in Nevada had been discovered during the Civil War, and it would have been able to sustain a lot of circulating silver if they had bothered to want to monetize it. So, in other words, they just said, no, we're going to ignore all that. We're not going to circulate silver as money. We're going to reduce the amount of backing of the monetary supply. So now you had this inverted pyramid of a small amount of gold trying to prop up all those circulating notes that the Union had circulated during the Civil War. And remember, we're still leaving out the Confederate part of this. Okay, where I'm just simplifying all of this. So what did they do? Well, they passed an act under Ulysses S. Grant called the Resumption Act. This was passed by Congress in 1875, just as about as he's ready to leave office in his first administration. And what the Resumption Act did, this flabbergasts me to this day, because what the Resumption Act did is it converted the Lincoln Greenback into specie convertibility. In other words, it said, oh, we're going to honor those circulating Lincoln Greenbacks. You can present them and get a gold coin for your $1 Lincoln Greenback. We're going to back it. And remember, it was not backed initially. So what Congress did, this is I hope people really latch onto this. What Congress did is it converted the Lincoln Greenback into Confederate money. Why? Because if you look at Confederate money, and I show the money in my books that just came out this year. If you look at Confederate money, there's a little declaration on every Confederate paper note bill. And it runs something to the effect of the Confederate States of America will pay to the bearer on demand X amount of dollars upon upon 2 years or 10 years after the ratification of a treaty of peace between the United States of America and the Confederate States of America. So, in other words, the Confederacy was issuing paper money that was a promissory note, that was a promise to pay with specie backing at a certain point after the end of the war. Okay. And that's what Congress converted the Union currency back into. In other words, this was the way for all those foreign financiers to put a lien on the labor of the South through the specie convertibility after the war. That's exactly what happened. Now, why is this important to this story about state bullion depositories today? Because what the Union had to do was remove and destroy a certain amount of Lincoln Greenbacks in circulation to be able to restore the convertibility of the currency. The reason why is that had they tried to back all of that circulating currency on that narrow basis of gold, you may have gotten a couple of flecks of gold for your dollar, but that would have, basically meant no convertibility at all, unless you were super wealthy. Follow me?
Yeah.
This is what the modern state bullion depositories are doing. They are not withdrawing any of the circulating money. They're saying, oh, we're going to back that now. So, in other words, your Federal Reserve note might be worth a couple of flecks of very tiny little flecks of gold. But we have a magical tool now that we can compute how many little nano flecks of gold that dollar bill is worth, and it's called the computer.
Right.
So you deposit your money in our state bullion depository, and we'll give you a plastic card that you can use to transact when you go buy groceries. And when you go buy your groceries, those groceries that the grocer will take your plastic card for are now gold backed.
Hmm.
Gold backed. I mean, it's such a complete scam, because what they're really doing is giving you a new electronic transfer system. Okay. We're giving you, Alexander, computer blips on a screen. You give us your hard assets.
All right.
and and now, we've got Mr. Trump's sovereign wealth fund, which I'm flabbergasted people haven't caught on to this, because what's the hard assets he's tendering for and trading? Federal land, all that stuff out there in the American West. That's a hefty chunk of money.
Owning real estate always has been and always will be one of the best ways to secure your future and build generational wealth. Whether you're buying or selling or reinvesting in the US, be sure to reach out to me through the link below and I can help you. I'm a licensed real estate agent in Northern California. Or if you're needing help in a different state, I can refer you to a good agent to help you with your needs. And by doing this, you'll be supporting the channel and me continuing my work, and you'll also be getting a good service as well. And another way you can support the channel is you can follow me on Patreon and Ko-Fi if you'd like to help me out directly through that. Their donations, that would be great as well, so I can continue delivering this information. And I'd just like to thank you all for watching. The video continues now. Thank you.